Good morning. I am here in the beautiful state of Mississippi, and I am trying to beat bad weather as we are supposed to be getting lots of rain. I thought I would go through symptoms of CPTSD and I would discuss those that are collectively shared by most. And I say most people with CPTSD because everybody's different. So not every single person who had or has CPTSD is experiencing those symptoms, but these are pretty much collectively so. I mean, they're experienced by most. Let's put it that way. So let's take the trust issue, for instance. It's one thing about CPTSD people or abuse, neglect survivors to distrust the world, as they say, right? Well, let's think about this. Let's think you're a female and you're coming out of the shopping center and it is closing time. Let's imagine it is 10 p.m., right? And you're walking with your bags, you went shopping and you got your bags ready to go. You're walking towards your car and you're pretty much isolated in the parking lot, but there's one van close to your car, maybe 2 spaces down, and you feel uncomfortable. You turn around and you get the guard from the mall and you ask him to escort you to your car. Well, you get in your car and then you leave. Would you say that that is lack of trust? I would say yes. Would you say that is a bad thing? I would say no. It kept you safe, didn't it? You do what you have to do. Mistrusting people you do not know is not necessarily a bad thing. And if you don't believe that, it would be nice if we could ask those people who did trust somebody to give them a ride, and those people were never heard of again, right? They trusted a total stranger. So to actually have lack of trust for others is not a bad thing. It's one of those things, you are getting in an elevator and you notice that there's a person in there with baggy clothes, a hood, seems very, very quiet in the corner, just scanning you. Do you go inside if the building is isolated? I hope not. You're mistrustful, aren't you? But that is not a bad thing. It keeps you safe, right? So that's one of those symptoms associated with CPTSD that I scratch my head like, what's wrong with not trusting strangers? But here's another one. What about when you do not trust even people you do know? Well, let's think about that one. How did you develop CPTSD? From abuse and neglect. From whom? From people you knew. Right? You trusted them and they let you down. So this symptom in particular, I've never understood, and I scratch my head, what is wrong with not trusting? It actually keeps you safe. To me, it actually makes you smart. Okay, here's another one. Aloneness. Well, first of all, we have to make sure that we understand what aloneness or loneliness means. There's a difference between alone and lonely. If you're alone, it means you are one. If you're lonely, chances are you're depressed, you feel isolated. Isolation, I've always said this, is never good, especially if you are experiencing depression or if you've been diagnosed with CPTSD. Isolation is never good, but being alone sometimes is necessary. You regroup, you reassess situations, you find a quiet place to let your creative juices flow. It can be very, very satisfying. What is not satisfying is loneliness. Loneliness is not good. So before we are so hasty, we really need to identify what is it exactly that we're feeling. Are we alone because we need to regroup? We need to, rethink everything, some maybe self-reflection? Or are we feeling lonely, right? Okay, so here's another one. Regulation of emotions. Well, you could look at it from this angle. Not everything goes back to your CPTSD. Maybe you have one of these personalities that are high strung. Maybe you are a type A personality. Maybe that's sort of just like who you are. It does not necessarily have to go back to CPTSD. Just because we sneeze doesn't mean that our sneeze or our cough, for that matter, has anything to do with our CPTSD. Sometimes we sneeze just because we have allergies. Sometimes we cough because something we drank went down the wrong pipe. Everything does not have to go back to CPTSD. Okay, flashbacks. I used to have a lot of those flashbacks. Flashbacks go together with intrusive thoughts, and intrusive thoughts are the result of obsessive compulsions. Most people suffer with obsessive compulsive disorder. And sometimes, just sometimes, in moderation is not necessarily a bad thing. So we don't always have to correlate OCD with something bad. Now, when it comes to flashbacks, typically if you have CPTSD, the flashbacks are nothing to celebrate or enjoy. On the contrary, they are terrible, especially when they happen during your sleep. You have night terrors, right? They are not fun. They're the result of a trauma. It is real, they're painful, they are very, very disturbing because you wake up tired, you didn't sleep so well, etc. So flashbacks are very, very specific. When you associate CPTSD with flashbacks, those flashbacks are not good. But flashbacks in general, we all have flashbacks. It is just a matter of managing the intensity of those flashbacks, and the frequency will let you know if you are functioning well or if you are not functioning. And then you take it from there. Hypervigilance. I love this one. Hypervigilance is quite common amongst PTSD sufferers, especially those military people. They came from war and they saw a lot of mayhem and a lot of tragedy around them, and so they are hyper vigilant. Same thing with CPTSD people. At the same time, you have to keep yourself safe. It is not a stretch to say that this is not a very safe world. If you don't believe me, all you have to do is turn on the news, right? Or if this were such a safe world, I think we would all be able to go to sleep with our doors open and our windows unlocked. But we don't do that, do we? There's a reason. The world has become overly populated. There are a lot of strange things happening out there, and because of that, we have to stay safe. So to say that hypervigilance is a bad thing, to me, that is a stretch, but you do have to have a balance. You cannot be way too hypervigilant, because then that borders into paranoia, right? And that is one thing that you don't want, because indeed that is coming from your imagination, and that is not a good thing. You always want something that is rooted in reality to stay safe. But if you're starting to imagine, let's say the usual conspiracy theory, people are after you, etc., you have to wonder, right? That's going a little too far in the spectrum.